She asked me over the phone on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice had that practiced hurt in it, the kind that's meant to make you feel like you've done something wrong. "Why don't you ever call me? Why are you always so distant?" I was standing in my kitchen, holding a coffee mug I'd forgotten I was holding. The question hung in the air like smoke, and I couldn't move. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I had too many. She kept talking. Something about how hard it is to have a child who doesn't care, who never reaches out, who treats her like a stranger. She said it like she was the one who'd been abandoned, like I was the one who had left. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just went quiet. Because what do you say to someone who's rewritten the entire story? How do you answer a question that requires you to drag up a past she's apparently decided never happened? I could feel decades of memory pressing against my chest. All those hours, all that silence, all those years of learning not to need her because she simply wasn't there. And now she wanted to know why I don't call? I didn't answer her right away. I couldn't, because to explain why I don't call, I'd have to take her back to a childhood she doesn't seem to remember. Alone wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single traumatic event I could point to and say, that's when everything broke. It was quieter than that, more persistent. It was coming home from school to an empty house every single day, starting when I was 7. The door would be unlocked, the lights would be off, I'd walk in and the silence would swallow me whole. I learned to make sandwiches standing on a chair so I could reach the counter. I learned which drawer had the flashlight for when I got scared at night. I learned to keep the TV on for noise, even if I wasn't watching it, because the house felt too big and too quiet when it was just me. She was working, I told myself. She had things to do, important things. I wasn't important enough to come home for. There were nights I'd put myself to bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of her car in the driveway. Sometimes she'd come home at 10, sometimes later. Sometimes I'd fall asleep before I heard her at all. I remember the hum of the refrigerator. I remembered checking the locks on the doors 3 times because I didn't know what else to do with the fear. I remember the neighbor asking once why I was always alone and the panic I felt trying to come up with an explanation that didn't make her sound bad. Because even then, even as a kid, I knew I was supposed to protect her reputation. There were school events she didn't come to, birthday parties I stopped having because I knew she wouldn't show up to help, teacher conferences she missed. I became the kid whose mom was always busy, the kid who learned not to ask for permission slips to be signed until the last possible minute, hoping this time she'd remember. Other kids had parents who picked them up, who packed lunches, who asked about their day. I had a house that echoed. I learned early that I was optional. I became very good at defending her even when no one was asking me to. She's tired, she works hard, she has a lot on her plate, she's doing her best. I'd repeat these things to myself like a mantra, especially on the nights when I'd sit by the window waiting for headlights that never came. I needed to believe there was a reason, that it wasn't about me, that if I could just be better, quieter, easier, maybe she'd want to be home. So I tried. I cleaned the house before she got back. I made sure my homework was done without being asked. I learned to need less, to ask for less, to be less. I thought if I could make myself small enough, undemanding enough, maybe I'd be worth staying for. When she forgot to pick me up from school and I had to walk home in the rain, I told myself she must have gotten stuck at work. When she missed my school play, I convinced myself it wasn't important anyway. When I got sick and had to take care of myself, I reasoned that she trusted me to be independent. I watched other families at the grocery store. moms who seemed annoyed by their kids but were still there, present, paying attention. I'd see them and feel this strange mix of confusion and envy. Why did their kids get someone who showed up? What were they doing that I wasn't? I started to believe I was the problem, too needy, too sensitive, too much. If I could just fix whatever was broken in me, maybe she'd see me differently. There were moments, though, when the explanations started to crack, like the time my friend's mom asked why mine never came to pick me up, and I realized I didn't actually have a good answer. Or when a teacher kept me after class to gently ask if everything was okay at home, and I felt my throat tighten with the weight of pretending everything was fine. I watched other families at the grocery store, moms who seemed annoyed by their kids but were still there, present, paying attention. I'd see them and feel this strange mix of confusion and envy. Why did their kids get someone who showed up? What were they doing that I wasn't? I started to believe I was the problem, too needy, too sensitive, too much. If I could just fix whatever was broken in me, maybe she'd see me differently. There were moments, though, when the explanations started to crack, like the time my friend's mom asked why mine never came to pick me up, and I realized I didn't actually have a good answer. Or when a teacher kept me after class to gently ask if everything was okay at home, and I felt my throat tighten with the weight of pretending everything was fine. I watched other families at the grocery store, moms who seemed annoyed by their kids but were still there, present, paying attention. I'd see them and feel this strange mix of confusion and envy. Why did their kids get someone who showed up? What were they doing that I wasn't? I started to believe I was the problem, too needy, too sensitive, too much. If I could just fix whatever was broken in me, maybe she'd see me differently. There were moments, though, when the explanations started to crack, like the time my friend's mom asked why mine never came to pick me up, and I realized I didn't actually have a good answer. Or when a teacher kept me after class to gently ask if everything was okay at home, and I felt my throat tighten with the weight of pretending everything was fine. I watched other families at the grocery store, moms who seemed annoyed by their kids but were still there, present, paying attention. I'd see them and feel this strange mix of confusion and envy. Why did their kids get someone who showed up? What were they doing that I wasn't? I started to believe I was the problem, too needy, too sensitive, too much. If I could just fix whatever was broken in me, maybe she'd see me differently. There were moments, though, when the explanations started to crack, like the time my friend's mom asked why mine never came to pick me up, and I realized I didn't actually have a good answer. Or when a teacher kept me after class to gently ask if everything was okay at home, and I felt my throat tighten with the weight of pretending everything was fine. I watched other families at the grocery store, moms who seemed annoyed by their kids but were still there, present, paying attention. I'd see them and feel this strange mix of confusion and envy. Why did their kids get someone who showed up? What were they doing that I wasn't? I started to believe I was the problem, too needy, too sensitive, too much. If I could just fix whatever was broken in me, maybe she'd see me differently. There were moments, though, when the explanations started to crack, like the time my friend's mom asked why mine never came to pick me up, and I realized I didn't actually have a good answer. Or when a teacher kept me after class to gently ask if everything was okay at home, and I felt my throat tighten with the weight of pretending everything was fine. I watched other families at the grocery store, moms who seemed annoyed by their kids but were still there, present, paying attention. I'd see them and feel this strange mix of confusion and envy. Why did their kids get someone who showed up? What were they doing that I wasn't? I started to believe I was the problem. Too needy, too sensitive, too much. If I could just fix whatever was broken in me, maybe she'd see me differently. There were moments, though, when the explanations started to crack. Like the time my friend's mom asked why mine never came to pick me up, and I realized I didn't actually have a good answer. Or when a teacher kept me after class to gently ask if everything was okay at home, and I felt my throat tighten with the weight of pretending everything was fine. I watched other families at the grocery store, moms who seemed annoyed by their kids, but were still there, present, paying attention. I'd see them and feel this strange mix of confusion and envy. Why did their kids get someone who So I learned to not want things from her. I learned to stop waiting by the door, stop checking the time, stop building moments in my mind that would never happen. I became a different kind of kid after that, quieter, more self-contained. Teachers would comment on how independent I was, how responsible. They thought it was maturity. It wasn't. It was resignation. I started making my own plans. I stopped asking her to come to things. I stopped mentioning events at school or projects I was proud of. I built a life that didn't require her participation because including her had become too painful. She didn't notice the shift, or if she did, she never said anything. Maybe it was easier for her too, a child who didn't need anything, who didn't make demands, who didn't remind her of all the ways she wasn't showing up. By the time I was a teenager, I'd perfected the art of emotional distance. I could sit in the same room with her and feel nothing, no longing, no resentment, just a flat, protective numbness. I moved through adolescence like that, self-sufficient by necessity. I got myself to school, managed my own schedule, applied to colleges on my own. I didn't ask for help because I'd learned that asking meant waiting and waiting meant disappointment. I carried it all silently, and she never asked why I'd become so distant. She wouldn't ask that question for another 15 years. By the time I reached adulthood, I'd become fluent in a language I hated, the performance of normal. Family gatherings were the worst. She'd introduce me with this practiced warmth, her hand on my shoulder like we were close, like we talked every week, like she knew anything real about my life. "This is my daughter," she'd say, smiling. "We're so proud of her." And I'd smile back, nod, play the part. Because what was the alternative? Correct her in front of everyone? Announce to relatives that the relationship they assumed existed was actually a carefully maintained fiction? It was easier to just go along with it. She'd post photos on social media, pictures of us at holidays, captions about how blessed she was to have such a wonderful child. People would comment about what a great mom she was. I'd see the notifications and feel this deep, disorienting exhaustion. She rewrote history constantly. She'd tell stories about my childhood that never happened, or she'd reshape events to cast herself as more present than she'd ever been. "Remember when we used to do that together?" she'd ask, referencing something I'd done alone. And I'd just say, yeah, because it wasn't worth the fight. The strangest part was how she seemed to believe her own revision. She'd gotten so good at performing motherhood in front of others that I think she'd convinced herself it was real. But when it was just us, nothing. No real questions, no curiosity about my life. She never asked about my job, my friends, my struggles, my goals. Conversations stayed surface level, safe. She'd talk about herself, and I'd listen. That was the dynamic. I realized somewhere in my mid-20s that I was doing all the work. I was the one maintaining the relationship. I was the one pretending. I was the one protecting her image, managing her feelings, making sure everything looked fine from the outside. And she didn't even see it. She didn't know me. Not really. She knew the version of me that smiled in photos and showed up when expected. She didn't know what kept me up at night, what I was afraid of, what I dreamed about. She'd never asked. I was emotionally invisible to her. I had been, my entire life. And I was exhausted from pretending that was okay. I was holding together a relationship that only existed in her version of reality. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't send a letter or have a conversation about boundaries. I just started pulling back, slowly, quietly, the way you'd step away from something fragile that you're afraid might shatter and cut you. I stopped initiating phone calls. When she'd reach out, I'd respond, but with less frequency, less detail. I'd let texts sit for a day or two before replying, not out of spite. I just didn't have the energy anymore. I started declining invitations, family dinners, holiday gatherings. I'd say I was busy or tired or had other plans. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I just needed to not perform. When I moved to a new apartment, I waited 3 months before giving her the address. The distance felt like breathing after years of holding my breath. I started building a life that didn't require her approval or her presence. I made friends who actually knew me. I went to therapy. I learned what it felt like to be around people who asked questions and remembered the answers. But the guilt was constant. That voice in my head, the one I'd been training since childhood, told me I was a bad daughter, that I was cold, that I was doing to her what I'd accused her of doing. I had to keep reminding myself, this wasn't abandonment, this was self-preservation. She noticed eventually. The comments started small at first, then sharper. "You're so hard to reach these days. I guess you're too busy for your own mother." She'd send texts that were just question marks when I didn't respond fast enough. Then came the flying monkeys, aunts and cousins reaching out saying she was worried about me, that she missed me, that family is important. They'd say it with such concern, like I was the one causing harm, like my absence was cruelty instead of survival. I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I just stayed quiet. Because I'd learned something important. Silence was the only language that protected me. Engaging meant being pulled back in. It meant defending myself to people who'd already decided I was wrong. It meant reopening wounds I'd spent years trying to close. So I let her be confused. I let her play the victim to whoever would listen. I let the family think whatever they wanted to think. I built a life where she was optional, peripheral, the same way I'd been to her for most of my childhood. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I found out how she was telling the story through a cousin who meant well but didn't know any better.
"Your mom is really hurt, you know?" she said over coffee one afternoon. "She doesn't understand why you're so distant. She said she tried so hard with you, but you've always been difficult." Difficult. That word sat between us like a stone. I didn't correct her. What would I even say? That the version of events my mother had been selling wasn't just incomplete, it was fiction? That the devoted, heartbroken mother she described didn't match the one who left me alone for years? My cousin kept talking. "She said she worked so hard to give you everything. She's confused why you won't just talk to her. She thinks maybe you need therapy or something." I almost laughed at that. I was in therapy. That's how I'd learned that what happened to me had a name. But according to my mother's version, she was the victim. I was the cold, ungrateful child who'd turned my back on a woman who sacrificed everything. She'd rewritten the past so thoroughly that she probably believed it herself by now. And people believed her. Of course they did. Society gives mothers the benefit of the doubt. Mothers are assumed to be loving, selfless, devoted. If the relationship is broken, it must be the child's fault. The child must be damaged, angry, unreasonable. No one asked me what happened. They just accepted her narrative and waited for me to apologize. I started hearing it from different people. Family is family. She's your mother. You only get one. As if biology erased accountability. As if I owed her a relationship simply because she gave birth to me. She'd positioned herself perfectly. Hurt, confused, blameless, and I was the villain in a story I didn't even recognize. I realized, sitting there with my coffee going cold, that she would never take responsibility. She would never acknowledge what she'd done, or more accurately, what she hadn't done. There would be no moment of reckoning, no apology, no validation. She needed to be the victim because admitting the truth would require looking at herself honestly, and she wasn't capable of that. I could spend the rest of my life waiting for her to see me, to own her part, to say she was sorry. Or I could accept that it would never come and choose my peace anyway. It happened at a family gathering I shouldn't have attended. I'd been there an hour when she cornered me in the kitchen, her voice low but sharp. "Why are you like this?" she asked. "Why don't you ever call? Why do you treat me like I'm nothing?" There was an edge to it this time. Desperation, maybe, or anger she'd been holding back. She wasn't asking, she was accusing. I looked at her for a long moment. I could feel the familiar pull to smooth things over, to shrink, to apologize for taking up space. But something in me had shifted. I was tired, and I was done pretending. "Because you left me alone when I needed you," I said, calm, steady. "Because I raised myself. Because I learned not to need you." Her face changed immediately, shock, then defensiveness. "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising. "I was working, I was doing my best. You have no idea how hard it was." I was 7. I came home to an empty house every day. I made my own meals, I put myself to bed. You weren't there. "I was providing for you." "I were absent," I interrupted, still calm. "And now you're angry that I'm distant? But I learned that from you." She stared at me like I'd struck her. Then came the tears, right on cue. "How can you say that to me?" she said, her voice breaking. "After everything I sacrificed? You're so cruel. You've always been so cold." There it was, the deflection, the reframing. Somehow, in the span of 30 seconds, I'd become the villain again. "I'm not doing this," I said quietly. "I'm not arguing about what happened. I know what I lived through, and I'm not apologizing for protecting myself now." "You're punishing me," she said, wiping her eyes. "That's what this is. You're punishing me for not being perfect." "I'm not punishing you. I'm just not pretending anymore." She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she'd never actually seen me at all. She walked away. Didn't say another word, just left the room, and I heard her telling someone in the next room that I'd been cruel to her, that she didn't know what she'd done to deserve this. I didn't follow her. I didn't try to explain or soften it or make her understand. I just stood there feeling something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. The confrontation didn't fix anything. I hadn't expected it to, but I'd said it out loud. I'd named it, and I didn't need her to validate it. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. The fallout was predictable. Within days, I started getting messages from relatives. Some were concerned, some were accusatory. "What did you say to your mother? She's devastated. You need to apologize." A few numbers I didn't recognize tried calling. I didn't answer. Then came the silence. She blocked me on social media, stopped reaching out entirely. It was the kind of silence designed to punish, to make me feel the weight of her absence and come crawling back. But I didn't feel punished. I felt tired, sad, but also clear. I grieved, but not for her. I grieved for the mother I should have had, the one who would have stayed, the one who would have seen me. I grieved the childhood I didn't get and the relationship that was never real to begin with. There was guilt, too. It crept in late at night, whispering that maybe I was too harsh, too unforgiving, too cold. But I learned in therapy to recognize that voice for what it was: conditioning, the belief that I owed her my peace just because she was my mother. I started building something quieter in the space she left behind. I leaned into friendships that felt reciprocal. I let myself be cared for by people who actually showed up. I practiced self-compassion, which was harder than it sounds when you've spent your whole life believing you weren't worth it. I created routines that felt safe: morning coffee without dread, weekends without obligation, holidays spent with people I chose, not people I was bound to by blood. The relationship would probably never heal. I'd accepted that. She would likely tell her version of the story for the rest of her life, and I'd remain the villain in it. But I'd also realized something important. I didn't need her to understand. I didn't need her acknowledgement or her apology. I just needed to stop waiting for them. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let someone go, even if they're your parent. So here's the answer to her question, the one she asked on that Tuesday afternoon, the one I couldn't give her then because she wasn't really asking, she was accusing. I don't call because I already grew up without you. I don't call because I learned to survive in your absence, and that survival meant building a life that didn't revolve around waiting for you to show up. I don't call because you're asking for a relationship we never had. You want me to give you something now that you never gave me then, and I can't. I won't. I don't call because every time I did, I was reminded of how little you actually knew me, how surface level every conversation was, how I was performing a role in a script you wrote without ever asking if I wanted the part. I don't call because it costs me too much, my peace, my energy, my sense of self. This isn't revenge, it's not punishment, it's just the truth. I've learned a lot in the years since I stopped waiting for you. I've learned that obligation isn't the same as love, that DNA doesn't erase damage, that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who will never see it. I've learned that breaking cycles means disappointing people. It means being called cold or cruel or ungrateful by people who weren't there and don't understand. And I've learned to be okay with that. There's a part of me, the little kid who used to sit by the window watching for your car, that still aches sometimes. That part wanted so badly to be worth staying for, to be seen, to matter. I honor that kid now by refusing to wait anymore. I don't owe you my presence just because you decided decades too late that you want it. I don't owe you explanations or forgiveness or access to a life I built in spite of your absence. You may never understand why I don't call. You may spend the rest of your life believing I'm the one who failed you, and I've accepted that I don't need you to.